Condemned: Criminal Origins is one of the first Xbox 360 titles, and it's actually one of the only completely original titles in the launch lineup. In the game, you play as criminal investigator named Ethan Thomas, who's on the trail of a serial killer. And it's basically this first-person action game in which you maybe descend into madness in this character's weird head, but also just get to beat the living daylights out of a whole bunch of really crazy, insane lunatics who are trying to do the same to you. This game has some of the most vicious, most amazing-looking hand-to-hand first-person combat that you'll ever have seen in a game. And this is what Condemned does extremely well. It's just too bad that the rest of the game doesn't exactly follow up. This game really feels kind of like a one-trick pony, but man, it's a really cool trick. You come in as you explore these different rundown, or shall we say condemned environments that are all really dark and gritty and filthy looking. And you're there with your forensic tools, as well as just with kind of your taser and whatever weapons you can find on hand to defend yourself against this seeming army of crazy thugs. What the game often boils down to is just you walking through really samey looking corridors, finding one or two thugs at a time that kind of will savagely run out at you and try to beat you down. And that's when the combat kicks in. The combat is actually really simple. There's just a block button and an attack button, and you kind of duck and move out of the way and block when you see an attack incoming and strike back. There's not a whole lot of depth to it, and you'll see the enemy AI do some really amazing things. Like they'll kind of lurk in ambush, they'll take fake swings at you and try to psych you out. They do some really cool stuff. It's just that you'll have seen most of this stuff after just a few hours, but the game itself is about 9 or 10 hours long, so by the time you've reached the end, the game has sort of run out of tricks and it gets to be pretty monotonous. There's some stuff to break up the action, like you do have your forensic tools, and what happens though is that the game really leads you by the hand. It's about as interactive as watching an episode of CSI, because basically you come into an area and the game tells you to hit a button to bring out your forensic tool, and you always equip the right one, and then you just have to stand in the right place and then kind of collect evidence, and then you'll bust out your cell phone and talk to your lady friend kind of back at base, and she'll tell you some more kind of plot-related stuff. But this stuff really just serves to break up the monotony of the action. It's not particularly challenging in any way, so it definitely could have been interesting, but at least it doesn't really get in your way. As for the combat, it really pretty much boils down to the melee weapons, but you do have a taser that can stun an opponent and give you a free shot, which is actually pretty cheap because you can use this to take out single enemies really easily. And you also get to use guns from time to time, but guns are really a small part of Condemned. You only ever get the amount of ammunition that's in the gun when you pick it up, so you'll get a shotgun with literally about 2 shots in it, and then you'll just throw it away and pick up the next kind of gnarly club or signpost or whatever you can get your hands on and do most of your damage that way. Condemned is a really impressive looking game, and a lot of its appeal overall definitely comes from its presentation. You couldn't get a game looking this good on a system other than the Xbox 360. With that said, the graphics definitely have some problems. On the one hand, you'll see some incredible looking animations. It's just some really shocking stuff. You've never seen enemies in games do some of this kind of stuff before. They just seem so incredibly enraged, and they also just seem totally crazy, and that's definitely what the game is going for. On the other hand, you'll see the same looking environments over and over. It's really easy to get lost in these kind of winding levels, and there's no map or anything to help guide you, so you'll often find yourself inadvertently backtracking and kind of getting spun around and disoriented. And the environments are also just incredibly dark. Obviously, that's what the game is going for. You're there kind of in pitch blackness with only your flashlight, but unless you artificially crank up the brightness on your screen, you're pretty much only going to see barely what's being illuminated by your flashlight, and after a while, that gets to be pretty dreary. Really, the issue with the graphics, if there is one, is that there's so little contrast in the types of environments you'll visit. You'll wish that there was just more stuff that kind of threw you for a loop instead of just one similar-looking corridor after another. The audio really helps sell the whole experience, on the other hand. There isn't a whole lot of music, and the voice acting is good, but there isn't that much of it. But what's really impressive about the sound is just the sound of things hitting other things. You haven't heard such kind of sickening, realistic sounding fighting moves in this type of game before. It really is about as close as you want to get to someone hitting you in the face with a crowbar and things like that. Condemned really does not hold back on the presentation of its graphic violence. Condemned is just one of those games where it has just so much potential to it. There are so many cool things that are absolutely worth experiencing, but you can't really consider it that great of a game because there's just such clear-cut room for improvement. You really get the sense that the guys working on this game, who recently they just put out Fear, which is an amazing game with sort of a similarly dark and morbid atmosphere, but in Condemned's case, it really just focuses on getting this one thing right, the act of hitting people with clubs, and it does that extremely well and tries to kind of drag it out for a long game and doesn't really carry its steam the whole way through and doesn't really fulfill a lot of the potential of its storyline. So I don't know, man. It just kind of makes me crazy to think about and makes me just want to hit something, man. I mean.